Thank you. That's a very interesting speech from the Honorable Zamzam. Yes, I want to come to my point of order. Honorable Speaker, you see, I want to say that there are no political rejects. And people who lose seats in Parliament are also professionals. Some of these people that lose seats here are professionals, Honorable Speaker. So if you say that they should not be given those positions, there are teachers here, there are engineers here, there are doctors here, and when they lose seats, they have an opportunity to serve the country in another capacity, Honorable Speaker, and therefore they cannot be political rejects, and they should not be denied an opportunity to be appointed in another position, including Honorable Zamzam. One day when you are not the women rep of Mombasa, the president will graciously say, you are good in social this, and we appoint you to this.
Honorable Owen, you have made your point. You're repeating yourself now. Let us proceed. Honorable Kibet Kimingoi, are you speaking on the same topic? Are you speaking on the same topic? No. Okay, then let's go to Honorable Marianne Kaitang, member for Aldai.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I stand to support the statement by Honorable Bensouda on the teacher disparity. And one thing, Honorable Speaker, is that Article 10 of the Constitution of Kenya talks about issues about human dignity, equity. It talks about social justice, inclusiveness, and equality, and all the issues with regards to human rights. And when you look at the teacher disparity and distribution across this country, the employment of these teachers, you find that that part of the Constitution is actually being, is not being adhered to by those who recruit and those who distribute these teachers across the various schools in this country. I'll give you an example, Honorable Speaker. In the schools in my constituency, especially in the escarpment, because of the very harsh terrain of those particular areas, you find that teachers are rarely posted in those schools, and you'll find even a school having only one TSC teacher against a population of about 300 students. And what parents are left to do is to dig into their pockets and pay BOM teachers to be able to get their learners or their children get education. That is being inequality, because the Kenya government pays for all teachers, and if my school, for example, that has one TSC teacher is being denied access to education and parents have to cough into their pockets, it means it's double jeopardy for these parents. They'll have been taxed, and at the same time they have to go into their pockets to get money to go and pay for teachers who will then teach these children. Again, these teachers who are being hired on BOM, we do not know whether they qualify to be teachers, because a board has sat and said this a child of this particular place fits to come and teach in that school, and yet the system of education says that for a teacher to be employed, they have to be a TSC employed. So one thing I support is that we need to relook at the TSC employment in this country, the teacher distribution, and I would wish to request the Committee on Education to actually provide to this House a list of all the teacher numbers in every school, student population in every school, because again, there is a policy on education that says that a teacher should be for every 40 learners. So if that is the case, in places where there is huge disparity, once the table is provided, then we can do fair distribution of these teachers. And number two, for those teachers who have not been employed and have and graduated in 2013, 2015, and all those years, they're about to retire before they get into employment. If that can also be considered, so that if there is any gap that needs to be filled, then those teachers who graduated much earlier be considered, so that they can be able to fill those gaps, and those schools that are in such places like my escarpment are able to get teachers, and the parents then don't have to go into their pockets. So I totally support the motion, the statement that has been brought by Honorable Bensouda, and we wish that the Committee on Education fast-tracks this process and be able to give us the data, because if you look at those data and those disparities, we'll find that this part of the Constitution, the Article 10, is actually being, is not being adhered to by the Ministry of Education and TSC more specifically, because when they hire teachers, they are not looking at those kind of disparities. And those disparities have gone to affect even human dignity and all the aspects, because these
students will sit one major exam called KPSEA, they'll sit an exam called KCSE, and all those exams are uniform across the country. The school that has all TSC teachers vis-a-vis the school that has one TSC teacher, at the exam time, they will not be given a different exam saying, because you do not have this type of teachers, we do not get this type of education. And finally, when they get to employment, and when they get to the employment industry, you will find that these teachers who do not, these schools or students that do not have teachers, they do not get opportunities to work because they do not get proper education or good education compared to the schools that had good or the good number of teachers. So it is something that
we need to all comply with the Constitution and give every part of this country equal distribution in terms of employment for teachers, in terms of distribution for those teachers who have been employed, so that all schools are equal. And we comply with our Constitution to ensure that no teacher is employed under BOM but under the TSC, because we all pay taxes, and all these taxes need to go into payment of salaries of these teachers, as opposed to parents going into their pockets to support education. I thank you, Honorable Speaker.
Thank you very much. I allowed quite a big amount of time because I know this is a very important matter that touches on every part of the country. But I think what has come out clearly is there's definitely need to have the minister come here to respond to those specific questions and to, get suggestions on looking at the policy. So now we'll move to the next. You already made your point of order. It's been noted. Okay.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I would like to bring to the attention of the House that we've come to the end of Q1 of this financial year. Honorable Speaker, we as members of Parliament will be walking a very tightrope if we do not start speaking now. Honorable Speaker, this Parliament has already passed for gazettement, approved for gazettement, members of CDFCs for various constituencies at a level of 99%. Honorable Speaker, as at today, the NGCDF board is yet to receive the disbursement for Q1 of this financial year. That is equivalent to 19.5 billion. Honorable Speaker, we run a risk of falling onto the trap that is being set. There is a court order that says NGCDF comes to an end 30th June 2026. If by Q1 there is no disbursement, and we know how the government has been disbursing, by Q2, the board will be in arrears of 39 billion. Honorable Speaker, if members of Parliament do not rise up and speak on behalf of the CDFCs to have this money received now, so that we beat the deadline of the court order in completing all the projects before May.
Because you're raising it as a point of order and it seems to be a substantial point, why don't you raise it as a substantive statement?
Honorable Speaker,
this afternoon or tomorrow?
I think with the leader here, this is something he can pick up without even having, because it's a matter of concern for all 290 constituents, and all members will agree with me. So, Honorable Speaker, we need to get answers when Treasury will start disbursing these funds, because already they are behind by 19.5 billion, and in 6 days' time, they will be behind by 39 billion. Honorable
Okay,
Speaker,
so we
thank
can
you.
tell Honorable Owen, maybe you can have a response in the afternoon.
Say this, Honorable Speaker, that a very important point being raised by Honorable Gesairo, and I think it is a concern to all of us because we have a court order, a deadline.
No, the question I'm asking, what we need, don't go over the points again.
Yes.
Simply, I'm requesting you or ruling that you get the answers.
Okay.
I can get in touch with the National Treasury and the board and then give a response in the afternoon.
Much obliged, Honorable Speaker. I'll get in touch with Treasury so that we get a response in the afternoon. I'll do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Honorable members, next order.
Order number 8, the National Police Service Amendment Bill, National Assembly Bill number 39 of 2025. First reading. A bill for an act of parliament to amend the National Police Service Act. Order number 9, motion. Formulation of a land use policy on zoning of land for agriculture and built development.
Move of the motion. Member for Westlands, Honorable Timothy Wanyonyi.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for giving me this time to move this motion, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to move the following motion, Madam Speaker, that aware that land is a critical but limited factor of protection that supports human habitation and food production. Noting that agriculture is Kenya's main economic mainstay, appreciating that the Central Bank of Kenya, CBK, Monetary Policy Committee Agriculture Sector Survey 2022 estimated the contribution of the agriculture sector to the country's gross domestic product, GDP, to be 22% directly and 27% indirectly through its linkages with other sectors. Further, appreciating that the survey showed that the sector employs over 40% of the Kenya's total population. Concerned that in the Land Reform Volume 3 publication, the Kenya Land Alliance land estimated that only 17% of the country's land mass is classified as suitable for rain-fed agriculture land, while the remainder is either semi-arid or arid. Further, concerned that the country's agricultural productivity has been decreasing over the years, cognizant of the fact that the decline in agricultural productivity is partly attributable to the shrinking agricultural land use due to unplanned settlements and encroach on agricultural lands. Further, concerned that agricultural lands in rural areas are continually being subdivided into small portions for built development, thereby diminishing the size of the land available for agriculture. Noting that there is need to put in place measures for effective land use in the country in order to guarantee optimal use of agriculture. Now, therefore, this House resolved that the government, through the Ministry of Lands, Public Works, Housing, Urban Development, puts in place a policy framework for effective land use in rural areas by consolidating and designating zones for built development, for commercial and residential developments with shared public utilities, and separate zones for agricultural use, in order to arrest further diminishing of agricultural land and steady the country's agricultural productivity. Madam Speaker, I beg to move. And Madam Speaker, this is informed by the way the country is progressing, Madam Speaker. We can see that areas that were mainly agricultural and most farms around, Madam Speaker, we've seen how they have been uprooting even coffee and other things, Madam Speaker, and then trying to build houses, Madam Speaker, for residential houses. Madam Speaker, I beg to move this motion that this House, Madam Speaker, sorry, this motion emphasizes the importance of sustainable land use in the environmental conservation as Article 69 of the Constitution of Kenya, which aligns with the objectives of this motion, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I also want to say that lack of clear guidelines in to access land use, the use of land, Madam Speaker, are often recipe to conflict and violence. The motion seeks, Madam Speaker, to prevent land use conflict between agriculture and build-up development zoning land. So that, Madam Speaker, if this policy is put in place, there will be earmarked that there are areas, Madam Speaker, that are designated for agriculture, and they'll never be disturbed, and they'll never be put to any other use other than agricultural use. Madam Speaker, allow me also to observe that there is urgent need to balance economic development with agricultural productivity and environmental sustainability while protecting the country's natural resources and reducing the risk of environmental degradation. Honorable Speaker, this policy stands also to protect agricultural land, thereby increasing productivity while contributing to food security. The land use, Madam Speaker, policy will therefore guarantee the entire population has sustainable access to public spaces, public service, public institutions, and social amenities. Madam Speaker, this motion also calls for policy on collaboration between the relevant ministries, including, Madam Speaker, Ministry of Lands, Public Works, Housing and Urban Development, Environment, Climate Change and Forestry, Agriculture and Livestock Development to develop the policy, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this motion also loudly calls for engagement with the key stakeholders, including farmers, developers, and local communities to ensure that the policy reflects their needs and aspirations. Land use policy should recognize the resources that are limited, hence, Madam Speaker, the need to have a long-term vision, but also to prioritize actions to respond to immediate challenges. Madam Speaker, the riparian land and wetlands support water resources to sustain the healthy ecological environment. A policy in place, Madam Speaker, will ensure that riparian land is well documented and mapped out. We have seen that, Madam Speaker, especially in Nairobi here, that riparian land has been encroached and people have haphazardly engaged into development by, Madam Speaker, building on the waterways. And we've seen that when the rains come down, Madam Speaker, have caused so much havoc in the city and places where people are staying, Madam Speaker, you find houses filled with water and people displaced. This is because of this haphazard development, Madam Speaker. Honorable Speaker, if this motion is passed, it will ensure the identification and designation areas for agricultural use, including, Madam Speaker, residential, commercial, and industrial uses, protecting prime land from encroachment, Madam Speaker. Because, Madam Speaker, if we look at, especially in the rural areas, Madam Speaker, the land is being subdivided into smaller units, Madam Speaker, whereby it becomes economically not viable. Because many times, Madam Speaker, I remember some time back in India, the Prime Minister then, Indira Gandhi, Madam Speaker, came up with the agrarian revolution because of the population of India and they needed to have sufficient food security. She came up with a system of model towns, Madam Speaker, where they moved people from the farms, those small farms, Madam Speaker, to stay in a model town where the government had developed and gave way for the land to be used for agriculture, and some for irrigation, and some, Madam Speaker, which was used for agriculture, and it has secured food security in India. And India, Madam Speaker, can even now feed itself and even export some of the food. And it's not that India is more arable than Kenya, but because of the policy that the government came up with, and they secured the food security for the citizens of that country, Madam Speaker. And I believe we can do the same, because we have seen countries like Israel, which are virtually a desert, Madam Speaker, but they have made very good use of their land. They have used irrigation and many others and have secured themselves, Madam Speaker. They don't suffer from any food shortages, Madam Speaker. We've seen in this country, Madam Speaker, the rains, the areas that are rain-fed, agricultural rain-fed. Madam Speaker, the land is being diminished because of these small subdivisions and making the land uneconomical. Honorable Speaker, integrating climate change in the land use and development planning will help identify and map disaster-prone areas, thus promoting land use practices that enhance a climate resilience and reduce effective effects of climate change. A regulation on the same will ensure adequate financial resource allocation for implementation of climate change action plan and related activities. Madam, this is now the in thing across the world, Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, because of the climate change, the effect of the climate change, Madam Speaker, is affecting so many things. We've seen that there are reports that the weather patterns have changed, Madam Speaker. The rising of the levels of water in the seas and many other areas, Madam Speaker. And also, you see the weather pattern now that was predictable, now is no longer predictable. You just find sometimes delays in the rains, or rains comes at the time that is not expected and causes a lot of havoc. So when we align this and make this policy to climate change, Madam Speaker, we shall secure ourselves and protect our environment. Honorable Speaker, the enactment of this policy will ensure that the environmental factors such as conservation of natural habitat and water services in the land use planning are considered. Honorable Speaker, the policy will also ensure public participation in the land use planning process to reflect the needs of the farmers and people in the ecosystem. Madam Speaker, public participation is a constitutional requirement, and Madam Speaker, when these things affect the people, we need to bring, Madam Speaker, to involve people so that they can give their views in this formulation of the policy, so that it is applied across the board and that it will be acceptable with everyone, Madam Speaker, and people can embrace it, because when we are going to secure land for agricultural use, Madam Speaker, it will improve our food security and also provide security for our people. Madam Speaker, I beg to move, and also, Madam Speaker, request the Honorable Julius Sunguli to second. Madam Speaker.
Yes, Honorable Sunguli.
Yeah, Madam Speaker, I am quite glad to second this important motion by our friend Honorable Tim Wanyonyi, because this motion, the purpose of this motion is actually to urge the government to put in place regulations, guidelines, and strategies to ensure the sustainable use of fertile land especially that related to farming. Madam Speaker, I must begin by saying that in this country, there is actually no shortage of policy, especially policies that bear the title of land policies. There are quite a number that have been set up. The agricultural policy of 2021, the national land use policy, and many others that I could name. But the specific issue that the honorable member is raising here is about the use of land in Kenya in a manner that is not planned and in a manner that is becoming unsustainable in the long run. Because fertile land is being used as places to build houses. And Madam Speaker, unless that issue is addressed, land is going to diminish, because we are one of those countries in the world where population is on the rise every day. And when population is rising, the demand for human habitat becomes important. And therefore, it becomes the responsibility of the government to make sure that in order to plan for future generations, we have to have land that is specifically zoned for agriculture and land that is prohibited for human habitat, and therefore to designate the kind of places where people can build their lands. This issue is actually more prominent in the rural areas. And those of us who represent rural constituencies know that places where there just used to be 5 elders now has very many children, and that land has been subdivided, and some of the young people have actually been allocated land very close to the river or quite in the middle of what used to be the farm, and that's where they have put their houses. And because of that, land has become very, very scarce. I come from a place which neighbors the Kisii area. And when we were growing up, an average person there owned about 10 acres. When he got 2 children, the land was divided into 5 acres each. And when those got children, the land was subdivided even further. Because of this, the land has been deteriorating. But what the government needs to do, Mr. Speaker, now, is to ensure that actually, apart from the policy that we set up, we look into the legal framework of our land use. One, there is now the one land law called the Land Act. But the title deed that we have there is one that gives you what you call absolute proprietorship. And I can see the honorable member from Murwadigiri is not listening yet, is yet a new lawyer who needs to listen to older lawyers. The title deed that we produce in Kenya is called absolute proprietorship. It therefore gives you absolute power over your land with very, very few restrictions. And unless we temper this absolute proprietorship to make it possible for government to intervene on how you may not use your land, it's going to be a terrible thing, because people are going to do to their land whatever they are going to do with it, and they will not care whether the nation is going to produce food or whether future generations are going to use this land. And apart from just subdivision, there is another enemy of the use of land that is going to make food even less and less sustainable. In the constituency, for instance, that I come from, we have been actually net producers of food. We produce maize, we produce milk, we produce beans, but now there is a new rush
to cash crop. And now everybody is growing sugarcane. A few years ago, the GTZ, which was a German company, a German NGO, mapped out the use of land in Transmara and said that this particular piece of land is good for animals. This particular piece of land is good for growing maize. This particular piece of land is good for this and that. Had we followed this blueprint that was placed by the GTZ, we would now be going ahead and producing food much better even than Kitale. But unfortunately, totally unguided, we have now rushed into the temptations of South Nyanza and other places and produce sugarcane, even in areas which are not sugarcane areas. The government must make a policy that will make sure that land is used for its purpose. Because whether we like it or not, if we try to force land to do what it cannot do, we will eventually collapse what it is already doing and collapse its future use. I think it is important that we go there, because you may forgive Kiambu for uprooting the coffee and placing real estate on their land. And that might be beneficial for people like us in the Rift Valley who are now embracing coffee. But if you do not get enough land on which will take over the responsibilities that used to be borne by Kiambu, we are no longer going to be proud as Kenya for being a coffee growing area. So, Mr. Speaker, I wish to urge that the government makes a more serious policy backed by regulations, backed by legislation the policy that is going to make sure that use of land is sustainable for production of food, is sustainable to maintain generations that we have now and generations that will come after us. Mr. Speaker, I beg to second.
Thank you. Order, honorable members, I propose the motion that aware that land is a critical but limited factor of production that supports human habitation and food production, noting that agriculture is Kenya's main economic mainstay, appreciating that the Central Bank of Kenya Monetary Policy Committee Agriculture Sector Survey 2022 estimated the contribution of the agriculture sector to the country's gross GDP to be 22% directly and 27% directly through its linkages and other sectors. Further, appreciating that the survey showed that the sector employs over 40% of the Kenya's total population, concerned that in the Land Reform Volume 3 publication, the Kenya Land Alliance land estimated that only 70% of country's land mass is classified as suitable for rain-fed agricultural land, while the remainder is either semi-arid or arid. Further concerned that the country's agricultural productivity has been decreasing over the years. Cognizant of the fact that the decline in agricultural productivity is partly attributable to the shrinking agricultural land due to unplanned settlements that encroach on agricultural lands. Further concerned that agricultural lands, Further concerned that agricultural lands in rural areas are continually being subdivided into small portions for build development, thereby diminishing the size of the land available for agriculture, noting that there is need to put in place measures for effective land use in the country and in order to guarantee optimal use of agriculture. Now, therefore, this House resolves that the government, through the Ministry of Lands, Public Works, Housing and Urban Development, puts in place a policy framework for effective land use in rural areas by consolidating and designating zones for built development for commercial and residential developments with shared public utilities, and separate zones for agricultural use in order to arrest further diminishing of agricultural land and steady the country's agricultural productivity. Before I give the first member to contribute on this, join me welcoming students from Faro School, Embakasi Central, Nairobi County. They are seated in the Speaker's Gallery and are welcome to our proceedings this morning. Thank you. The Honorable Zamzam, I can't see Zamzam there. The Honorable Andrew Kwame. And before you contribute, the Honorable KJ, I can't see your card, so you have to put a card in there if you want to contribute. Honorable Kwame.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me start by saying that land is a very, very important tool of everything within our country. The only unfortunate thing is that it is limited. What we have is what we must use. And in order that we maximize benefit of use of land, we must do what is necessary for maximization. Mr. Speaker, ever since we knew Kenya as an agricultural country, but we don't seem to be maintaining that philosophy of Kenya being an agricultural country, because our productivity, as the motion says, is declining. It is important we wake up before it is too late and maximize the use of the land that we have. If I start with agriculture, Mr. Speaker, I must say that we have not taken agriculture as a very, very important as something very important for us to work on. Yet agriculture is responsible for our food, and it is responsible for various other cash earning. If we use our land properly for agriculture, we would be able to have food and also export our agricultural products. That will help our economy at a very high level, and I really appeal that we use all possible methods of improving agriculture. Even training of agriculturalists has gone down. Universities are not training enough number of agriculturists and extension officers, so that the trained staff could go out and help the ordinary people, telling them what to do and how to use their land in order that we can do our maximum. My colleagues have mentioned, and I agree, that sometimes you find a fertile land being used for building houses. And the dry land, if there is any dry area, maybe rocky and whatever, which would have been very useful for building the houses, that kind of piece of land is left lying idle, and people rush for an area which can be used for agriculture. So in zoning that that is in the motion, we could guide people on how they can live, leaving the fertile land for agriculture, and a land which is not very fertile can be used for these other purposes like building houses. Mr. Speaker, I also want to say that on the commercial side, we need to have maybe our shopping centers built in areas which are not extremely productive agriculturally. We can be maximizing the use of our agriculture if we leave, like I said before, fertile land for agriculture and dry land for building these other purposes. If we use our land carefully, it will also help us to give necessary facilities to those who are living in a collective area where you have call it a small residential place. people can be building their houses there so that if you bring water, the water will cover many people instead of, like I see in our area particularly, people building their homes scattered all over, making it very difficult for the government to give them necessary facilities. I support the idea that zoning of how we can be able to use our land is very important, and we must do it. It is only unfortunate that this kind of statement is coming late when people have already built beautiful houses out there on land that ought to have been spared for agriculture. Mr. Speaker, I support.
Thank you. Honorable Sarah Korere.
Shukrani Mheshimiwa Spika. Mheshimiwa Spika, ningependa pia kuongeza sauti yangu katika kuchangia hoja hii ya kutaka pahala maalum kutengwa ili kuweza kuzalisha chakula katika nchi hii na pia pahala maalum pa majengo. Lakini Mheshimiwa Spika, sio pahala pa kuzalisha chakula kwa kilimo peke yake, manake pia ufugaji Mheshimiwa Spika ni kiinua uchumi muhimu sana katika nchi hii. Na Mheshimiwa Spika, hivi masiku za karibu